It has been it's been a rough couple of months since this movie came out. You know what? That's not even really the half of it. I'll just say, in my view, the last few months of my life have been some of the hardest months of my entire adult life. Just straight up. I'm just going to put it out there. And a friend of ours suggested this book by Dr. Bruce Lipton called The Biology of Belief. And I listened to the audiobook of it. And I have to say, it took the dude a really long time to get around to the point, or maybe it just took a really long time for me to get the point he was trying to make the way he made it. But I came away from this book with a very interesting point that I think we don't talk about this stuff as a society very much. Because I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to scientific concepts, the average person in public is talked down to. Like we're all too stupid to get it. Especially when it comes to our brains. Have you ever noticed that when they talk to people and they talk about neurology and they always talk to you like, your little brain has little neurons that send out little signals, like you're 5.
Most of the nerve impulses enter here.
In the spinal cord.
And they pass through here to this relay center at the base of the brain.
Yes, that would be what is called the thalamus.
And the impulses go on upward to their destination.
Their destination in the gray outer layer of the brain called the cortex.
But that was the one thing during the film that it's one of the most basic concepts, but it stuck out with me the most.
In the end, cybernetic modification of the human being makes information and its communication the key to control, making reality itself malleable, and our interaction with the technology at hand has created its own feedback derived from our interpreted reality.
The world about us is accessible only through a nervous system.
And it's something I think is greatly overlooked by a lot of people. I know it was overlooked by me. And that fact is that your reality really is based on your perceptions. I mean, for the majority of us, our brains are not making actual contact with the outside world. They stay in our skull. Hopefully your brain is staying in your skull, right? But your brain is continuously constructing your external reality based upon the signals that it's receiving from your senses. You are reliant upon your senses for the information that you need to construct the reality that you perceive. That's a huge distinction there. So there's the map, and then there's the territory. And the map is not the territory. And I think this is a very huge distinction about our realities that is overlooked by a lot of people. And it's just because it's not ever explained to us that way. But really, our reality is based upon signals. And it's not just your external reality that's based upon signals. And that's what I got out of this book. So let's go back to the 90s when they were just making this claim left and right that some of us just have bad genes, that a lot of us do. We just have bad genes. All the rise in cancer and disease is all bad genes, or a lot of it's due to bad genes. I mean, that used to be a major assertion. Actually, in the past half a century, it has come to light that our genes don't control themselves. Our genes are neither on nor off. Genes have to be activated. And Dr. Lipton points out that these genes are either covered or uncovered by a protein, and in order for it to be activated, the protein sleeve has to be regulated. The gene controls nothing. The gene is merely responding to the signal that it gets from the environment. That, in summation, is a field of study known as epigenetics. That has to do with how different biological and environmental signals affect our gene expression. In fact, back in 2012, a research team led by the University of Washington in Seattle identified the location of millions of DNA switches, quote unquote, that dictate how, when, and where different genes turn on and off in our bodies. There was even an article in the International Journal of Radiation Biology back in 2011 titled "DNA is a Fractal Antenna in Electromagnetic Fields," and it had to do with EMF interaction with DNA, which contribute to reactivity of DNA with the EMF in the environment, which they concluded could account for the increases in cancer from all of the EMF in our environment, etc. In other words, it's signals that are the mechanism that control your genes. So you have signals from your external reality going to your brain, creating your reality, and you have signals activating your genes. So you have signals controlling everything all the way down to the cellular level in your body.
The era we are entering might well be characterized as an era of communication.
So ultimately, science is now coming to the conclusion that signals control everything. Perception of signals is running our biology. That's what this book talks about. And if you come to that conclusion, then what you also have to understand is if perception can run everything, misperception can also run everything. Because not every perception is correct. That's why we have words like assumption. You know, did your mom ever say, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me? Haha. But it's kind of true. Because I think a lot of arguments are caused by assumptions and misperceptions. And misperception or bad signals can then literally lead to dysfunction and disease. When Dr. Lipton put cells in a petri dish, he found something very basic and very interesting about cells. If he put nutrients in the dish, these cells would perceive the nutrition and then they would run toward the nutrients and try to assimilate them in a state that Dr. Lipton called growth. But when he put toxic stuff in the petri dish, the cells would back away in a state called protection. The cell would shut down or shrink away, try to protect itself from this toxin. So you have these two main states, growth or protection, which are mutually exclusive. You can't be in one state and the other state at the same time. It's not physically possible to run forward and backward at the same time. The cell would either move toward the growth stimuli and be open, take in the nutrients, or it would run away and close itself down and try to protect itself from something toxic. There's actually a third state he talks about, which is basically neutral and doesn't cause the cell to do one or the other, which he refers to as elevator music because it's kind of like when you go into an elevator and it's playing some horrible music and you don't run away screaming from it because it's so horrible, but you also don't dance to it either because it's so good. You just kind of stand there and put up with it till you can get off on the next floor. But really, you have two fundamental actions that result from these signals. You have growth or protection. And he goes on to point out that at the human level, this equates to the ultimate expressions of love and fear. And if you think about it, we as humans react very much like those individual cells. Because if there's love on the line, people will do crazy things for love. They will put themselves through all manner of whatever to get love. They will run toward it because love is the highest and deepest and most amazing form of growth that we humans can achieve. Loving somebody, right? But fear, on the flip side of that, that is the most negative state you can be in. It puts you into fight or flight, which actually triggers a full-blown protection and stress response. You run from fear, you wall yourself off from fear, you attempt to protect yourself from fear, you get angry. I mean, there's all kinds of negative emotions that come along with fear, which is related to a mechanism between your central nervous system and your endocrine system called the Hpa Axis. The H stands for hypothalamus, the P stands for pituitary gland, and the A stands for adrenal glands. So the hypothalamus interprets the signals from these perceptions. And then these signal perceptions are what turn into growth or protection. The hypothalamus uses perceptions to engage your body in a behavior that, if it's protection, will come in the form of a stress response. That information is then sent to your pituitary, which is your body's master gland, which Lipton points out is because it's what sends signals to 50 trillion cells in your body to coordinate and carry out response actions. And that's what makes the pituitary kind of like the director of an orchestra in your body. It's the master gland. So if the signal is perceived as a threat and a protection response is necessary to protect from that threat, then it activates your adrenal glands, which are associated with your fight or flight response. Your adrenal glands are what send out stress hormones. That is how stress activates your Hpa axis. When this happens, the blood is then sent away from your gut and your brain, where it's enabling growth through nourishment and maintenance of your body, and it's preferentially sent to your arms and legs to enable the fight or flight response. When this happens, it also shuts down your immune system. Do you see how that works? So you are now in full-on stress, your immune system's function is impaired, and your body is not in growth, it's not being nourished. And Lipton points out if you're not growing, you're dying. Because not growing is kind of the basic definition of death. Death is defined as the cessation of all biological functions that sustain a living organism. And you're not immediately, it's not like you immediately die, obviously. It's not like every biological function you have is just gone. But your basic maintenance and nourishment is not happening because all your blood has gone to the wrong place to enable your fight or flight response. And when this fight or flight is triggered and the stress response happens, what's supposed to happen is after the stressor or the detected threat signal is over, your system is supposed to go back to normal and you're supposed to go to a relaxation state. But what's happening in our society, everyone is so incredibly stressed out all the time for various reasons. It's to the point where anxiety has now overtaken depression. When you're in a chronic stress state, your immune system becomes chronically impaired. You can see how this would lead to all kinds of disease. If you're constantly in that state and your body is not allowed to relax, and it comes across in all kinds of symptoms, everything from headaches and fatigue and muscle tension to backaches. People start getting a lot of back pain and they don't know why, and they think, oh, it's probably just because I'm sitting slouched at my computer, and maybe it has to do with your posture, but it could also be stress can cause that also. As you keep going, you start talking about all this dis-ease. There are professionals out there who are now arguing that many disorders that we have in this society are aggravated by this exact thing I'm talking about. And you could see why. This is all about signals and how signals control everything.
Of all the states throughout this nation, the happiest by far is the state of relaxation.
So the takeaway is that we really are run by signals from our environment. And the signals generally fall into two categories: growth or protection. And when you look at it from an epigenetic standpoint, that biology is run on these signals, you can start to see how negative feelings and perceptions on a human level can contribute to states of disease and disorder on an epigenetic cellular level. And so Lipton talks about how there are three main factors that negatively impact us. 3 T's: trauma, toxins, and thought. Out of those 3 factors, thought is probably the one that we personally have the most control over in our daily lives. And I've just been thinking about this a lot, because if you look at the way our society is structured, I mean, people are just eating this steady diet of absolutely negative information that does not empower them at all.
Another portion of the PSYOP program, primarily directed toward the civilian population.
It's not in context of anything. It's one random scandal after another. They're just having their buttons pushed on a weekly basis about some political thing or some scandal in Hollywood or some whatever. And it's just one negative thing after another most of the time. It just makes you think about how so many people are just walking around all day filling themselves up with physically negative signals, mentally negative signals, emotionally negative signal. It's just, what that does to the average person is bad enough, but what that does to society as a whole, it's like steering an entire herd of people through negativity. And if you go back to what I said at the beginning, where perception is creating reality, because it is, all of our individual realities are created through our perceptions. I mean, that's just how it is. What you know is your reality is completely based upon perceptions of signals received by your brain and translated into your reality. And your significant other's reality, and your children's reality, and your parents' reality, and your neighbor's reality, and then just keep going with that until you get to your town, your state, your country, all of the entire world. That is how it works.
Signal, the painting itself. Receiver, all the eyes and nervous systems and previous conditionings of those who see the painting. Destination, their minds, their emotions, their experience.
It's a kind of a mind-blowing concept when you really put it all together. This book, I mean, he comes to this conclusion after he thinks of all that, and then he goes, and this proves that the universe controls everything, and Gaia theory, and something else, and then that's when he totally lost me. I hate to say it. I think if anything, what he is saying here kind of hints at intelligent design, more than it hints at any kind of Gaia theory or whatever, but I'm not going to judge somebody else for their spiritual beliefs. That's just not my job. So I would have to say I personally don't agree with that, but what he's saying scientifically about his findings in these studies makes a whole lot of sense on a real there's something about it that just rings true on a very basic level. So ultimately what this says is that you have a lot more power in your own head and in your own personal life than most people give themselves credit for. That's how powerful signals and information really are. But I guess in a way too, what it's also saying is with great power comes great responsibility. And I think there's a lot of people who don't want to hear this information too, probably, because they don't want to have to take responsibility for the things they say, the harshness with which they say it, the way they talk to certain people, probably the way they talk to their own self. There are people out there who have actually cured themselves from cancer through the power of positive thought. This is why that works, right here. And when I read stuff like this and I really think about it, I get to a point where I go, wow, think about how the world could be if we just all had a basic understanding of information like this. But at the same time, you have people all over the internet saying some of the most atrocious things that I don't believe the majority of those people. I cannot, unless I want to lose all faith in humanity altogether, I cannot believe that those people would actually talk like that to human beings in real life. People should not talk that way to each other, and there's a scientific reason why they shouldn't. And for people who have no faith or a spiritual reason why they shouldn't, now they have a scientific reason why they shouldn't. Just shouldn't. And I'm going to go one better and say that if you're talking like that, you're probably actually hurting yourself too. Because you're just sending out negative signals all over the place. It goes back to some of the most fundamental advice about loving your neighbor that we've ever been given, doesn't it? Anyways, I've probably rambled enough. I had to get back to my other research, but I just wanted to share that with you all because it really has made an impact on me. And if it can help you in any way in your own life, just to think about it from that perspective, because I just had never really thought about it that way before, and it really kind of opened up my eyes. So it makes a lot more sense than just telling everybody we got bad genes, doesn't it?